I've been dead for 145 years by MMKR2. I remember the date better than anyone else, for this day was the day I met my demise. It was seemingly average to most, with the exclusion of a few, but to me, it was what changed my world and my perception of time. August 14th, 1874. I was the owner of a farm down south, a farm that made my wife and I's living. It was rather small, but it was enough. The days would be long and filled with labor, but it was home. I had a dog and 3 cats, who all did their part hunting the mice, to which would be the fruit of their labors. It was a simple life, but it was my life. Later, in our young marriage, my wife Mary and I had our first child. His name was Robert. We called him Rob. He was an intelligent young boy showing high potential at life at such a young age. He grew to be a strong young boy, to the age of 10, when this story takes place. My farm was old. The buildings were dilapidated, for we had little money to spend on anything other than our living expenses. Bucket in hand, I started across the farm towards the cows, happily, whilst whistling an old tune. My heart rattled when I heard the creak. The silo above was an eyesore, being one of the oldest buildings that still stood, and it was starting to give out. I made a note of it in my mind and continued down the dirt path and into the barn ahead. I tensed when I caught sight of Rob standing in front of the barn, waiting for me. "What are you doing out here, son?" I asked as I approached him. I opened the barn and he started towards one of the cows. "Well, I was just walking here when I heard you skipping over." He let out a small laugh. My face reddened at the slightest. "I ought to put you in your place for saying that," I remarked. Rob darted out of the barn like a bullet and ran towards the neighbor's buildings. I dropped the bucket and started after him. I heard the creaking louden, and sure enough, Rob was running in the silo's direction. I sprinted as fast as I could, but Rob was no easy kid to catch. I could hear him letting out a playful laugh when I suddenly heard the roof give in. The top piece was raining down from the sky, casting a shadow over me. I was running faster than a grasshopper, so it would be no easy task to stop before the roof hit the ground. Luckily, Rob had already passed it and crashed onto the floor, out of breath. My shoes skid into the ground, making dust fly, but I drifted too far into the range. The million-ton piece had hit the ground, making my dust cloud seem like cigarette smoke compared to the full cloud of the impact. My vision went dark. I didn't feel anything from the fall, strangely enough, so I brushed myself off and headed out of the ruins. What an anomaly, I thought to myself, as I ran out to tell Rob about my lack of injury. "You're in a lot of trouble for letting me get near death like that," I jokingly yelled. Rob's expression didn't follow through with my comment, though, like he never heard me. Instead, he just stared with the color drained from his face. I approached him, this time right near him. "Son," I yelled. He was ignoring me, I thought. Rob ran in the direction of the house. I followed close behind him, not feeling anything other than the wind. At the foot of the porch stairs, Rob had broken down like the silo and collapsed onto the ground, head and arms just sobbing. I sat on the stairs next to him and put my head on his shoulder. As I reached, my hand went straight through him. My heart stopped and my brain went numb. Mary had walked out of the house, straight through me, as she saw the fallen silo top. "It's horrible, Dad got crushed," Rob cried out. Mary's eyes teared up. "Don't move out of this house, you hear? "Get inside and make yourself comfortable," Mary said. "Hello?" I yelled. Neither one of them heard me. Mary ran to the ruins. I followed, jumping off the stairs. My eyes widened when I realized I was still at the level of the stairs, flying. By concentration, I was able to move at an incredible speed. I passed Mary in a second and headed to the pile. I froze when I saw that below the rubble was a large puddle of blood. It came true to me. All those legends and stories, for I had turned into none other than a ghost. The following days were heavy. I had no desire to eat or drink anymore, but my heart throbbed for love. I saw my own funeral, where my family cried themselves to the next day. I didn't feel tired, but I sure wanted to rest all this emotion off. So I fell asleep in my barn. When I awoke, the walls of our bedroom had chipped, and a musty smell hit me. I started out into the hallway where it looked kind of worn. I went to Rob's room to check on him, but his room was nothing more than empty. Startled, I went down the stairs to greet Mary, even though she couldn't hear me. I shook as I saw the wrinkles on her face. She was by the fireplace, knitting. I saw a calendar on the mantel. It read January 12th, 1890. I slept for 26 years? I went out into the farm, which looked rather healthy, even in the winter. I saw a man approach me, followed by a woman. I yelled at Mary at the top of my lungs, warning her of the strange visitors. Alas, she didn't hear me. The man walked in. "The animals are healthy and taken care of, Ma," he said. Why was this guy calling my wife his mother? I suddenly came to the realization that this is Rob, and the woman with him was his wife. I wish Pops was still around. Oh, how I miss him dearly. He'd be proud of my work here, he said delicately. A tear formed in my eye. I wanted to tell him I was still there, but he would never be able to hear me. I knew that I didn't want to be here anymore. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. I awoke to darkness. The musty smell was very clear now. The floorboards were broken and the paint was nearly gone. The items in the house were gone too. My heart raced. I flew out into the house and into the field, where all the buildings were just covered in ivy. I smelled something strange yet satisfying to my nose. I flew up ahead to where I saw a large strip of hard gray rock, moving objects with wheels that went by incredibly fast. I followed the strip endlessly until I came to a part of town with those objects all over it. Where was Mary? Where was Rob? I looked up at the church and the sign read August 14th, 1919. I had been asleep for 45 years. I wanted to see Rob more than anything right now. Perhaps I could finally talk to him. As my desire grew, I was brought to him. My body flew for what seemed like forever at top speed, until I came to his house. Inside was an old man and his wife. The old man was pouring himself a glass of tea, and the woman was knitting by the fire. I opened the door to reveal two small children. They must have been Rob's grandchildren, which probably means Mary has passed by now. As they greeted each other, I closed my eyes, wanting to get out of this place as fast as I could. I awoke in the house, but I flew quickly out onto the street, where the objects were everywhere. I found a church which looked brand new. The clock read June 11th, 1955. On the gray strip were several more objects that passed, this time a dark green. There were a bunch of soldiers on top of it, with the strangest uniforms I have ever seen. This time, I decided to learn about the future. I wanted to know what all of this was, so I stayed in the city for a long time. It wasn't until a year after that I knew what cards and roads were, that telephones were these magical devices that would allow you to talk to someone from far away. A TV was a machine that would allow you a window into other people's lives. It was all so stunning to me. And here I was, still in my overalls, while everyone else wore suit and tie. It was 1956 when I decided to finally go back into that house. There were a few adults and kids there, none of which I knew. I knew for certain at this point that Rob was dead. His kids had become old, and his kids' kids had also become old. By this time, I figured my great-grandchildren were alive. It haunted me, but I wanted to go ahead. So, I closed my eyes and drifted off into sleep. I awoke to hear the sound of cars everywhere. I flew out of the house to see the roads and buildings, which were much, much taller. People were walking around the streets, some holding an object up to their ear, talking. This, my friends, is the time I'm in now. The clock read July 16th, 2012. People were tapping these rectangles, and the cars that passed were nearly silent, and the buildings were all glassy. And so, just as I did in 1955, I learned. I learned what smartphones were, the world and technology and computers. I learned until my mind was filled with this new era of life. It was January of 2019 when I finally realized all there was. It took me years to learn, and now I am completely familiar. By this time, I visited my family, and I saw that I was a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, since my children had children young. It was a normal day, when all of a sudden I was able to successfully grab something. That something is the smartphone that I am currently using right now. I wanted to tell everyone about my adventure through time, and how it is to learn of your children's 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 children. After typing as much as I did, I heard a voice. This voice was to me. After all this time, all the eras, someone had finally reached me. Even when learning I had pains, and suffered the misery of no communication. It was a very hard life, but I had gotten used to it. I knew I would always miss my children and my wife, and I had come to accept that. This voice lit a spark in my brain that hasn't been lit in 145 years, and I listened to what it had to say. It offered me my life in 1874, at the cost of me knowing everything that I do now, and the fact that no one would ever believe me if I were to say anything about these times. I thought carefully, and I realized that I have no future here. So, as soon as I hit post, I'll finally be transported back to my time, where I will live the rest of my years as if nothing had happened. The voice said I would stop just before the silo hit the ground. Thanks for listening. Best of luck to all you do in this time. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my $10 and above patrons, Dan R., Cody V., Paul Z., Chaos X, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, JY Pyromancer, Hayden MH, Ethan A., and Dark Side of the Bear. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you want to become a patron at any level, you will get Patreon-only content. There's already one story out this month. I plan on putting out 2 to 3 more, hopefully. Another one will be out by the end of the week of the 17th, so we'll see. No guarantees, but I promise you guys will get at least another one this month. So if any of this stuff sounds good to you, head over to the Patreon linked in the description. You get access to a bunch of stuff, and it's pretty worth it, if I do say so myself. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter too, @RealCreepSin.